Today we've got 5 tips all for beginners on how to record and mix drums better. If you need to hear this, don't go anywhere. What's going on, y'all? Ray here with Second Chance Rising, and if you're new to the channel, it's not just about our music, but it's about our ministry as well as recording and mixing tips. So if any of that content interests you, please hit that subscribe button, support the channel, ring that bell for future notifications. Let's get right into it. Tip number 1 is to record it right at the source. Now, I use Studio One as my DAW. And Joe Gilder does some tremendous, great tutorials on that, and that's one of the things that he preaches all together. I always kind of underestimated that. I also am a lifetime member, Produce Like a Pro from Warren Hewitt. You've probably seen some of his videos around. And I really realized this when I started getting some of the tracks that they provide, and they almost seem like they mix themselves. Once I start bringing the levels up, the tracks just sounded really good already. So what you want to accomplish is recording these tracks to where they sound good already, and you want to make them great later on in the mix. Don't get into the habit of I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix that in the mix. If the drummer's not in time with the song, maybe you need to take a break, let him familiarize himself with the song a little bit more, or maybe if there's a ringing in the tom or the snare's not quite right, then go ahead and tune that kit. Take that extra time. It's going to pay off, because if you try to fix these things in the mix, you'll just bog yourself down in time and get frustrated. So tip number 2 would be to simplify the miking technique. Now, one of the techniques that I like to use is the Glyn Johns method, and I'll kind of give you a small rundown on it here, but you can Google that and find out a little bit more about it. But basically, it's one mic directly over the top of the snare, another mic to the right of the drummer, somewhat pointing at the snare going across the kit, and then a kick drum mic. And that's pretty much what that is. The most important thing is to make sure your 2 overhead mics, the mic over the snare and over the drummer's right shoulder, are in phase. So you need to make sure that you measure from the center of that snare drum to both those mics and make sure that they're pretty close. Now, what I like to do also, and the way I was learning, is I would mic the snare top and the bottom. I'd also mic the kick drum inside and outside, and I would mic the toms. And then I would be able to bring in those other elements of that kit and try to round out that sound and that drum sound. But if you just use the Glyn Johns method strictly, you can get a pretty nice sound and simplify that for yourself a little bit. Tip number 3 is use drum samples. Now, some of the purists don't like to do that. Sometimes some of your drummers don't like the idea that their drums are being replaced or blended in with samples. But it's almost a necessity in a lot of our home studios now. And what else I've also found out is talking with so many producers and looking at so many professional mixes is that just about seems like everything that we hear on the radio nowadays has some samples included into the drum sound. In the home studios, we're somewhat limited on our space and what kind of sound that we can achieve. In this studio ourselves, we're in a 20 by 20 building with an 8-foot relatively low ceiling. So sometimes we can't achieve all of the best sound that we would like. It's like if you were in a nice studio up in Nashville or LA and New York somewhere. But we can achieve a pretty good sound in here. But when we blend those samples in, then we can really achieve a nice professional sound and even kind of kick it up a notch. I listened to a professional drummer the other day here on YouTube, and he talked about he had 50 different snares, and sometimes he might bring 10 to 20 of them to a session. And we don't have that in a lot of home studios. We don't have that many options, and the drummers that you're working with don't have that many options. So, maybe they have a wooden snare, it's a little warmer, maybe a metal snare, it's a little sharper, a little spikier, a little more high pitched. But the samples enable us to be able to audition those drums in and out of the kit and to achieve just the sound that we want. I particularly use Studio Superior Drummer 3, which is fantastic. It's got literally 100 different options of snares and kick drums, and I like to blend those in to just get the exact sound I like. And what is the exact sound? That kind of leads us to tip number 4. Tip number 4 is use reference tracks. Everyone says this, but sometimes I was so so stubborn that I didn't even pull those reference tracks in maybe till the mix was all the way almost completely done. Then I started comparing. But what I challenge you to do is once you find a song that you really like that kick drum, you really like that snare sound, bring that in early on in your mix. And as you begin to mix the drums, try to emulate that kick drum and that snare from that reference track that you want. You know, if you only get 50% there of trying to achieve that same sound, you know, you're going to have a pretty good sound in most cases. You know, and this is another case where your samples, your drum samples will come into play as you get to audition the different type of drums, the different type of snares and the kick drums. You'll be able to achieve closer to your reference track that you're looking for. You know, so many times, you know, I'm just pulling up and I'm mixing the drums and I'm, you know, boom, 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 and I'm listening to my kick drum and I don't know, I don't have anything to compare it to. Is that really what I'm looking for? Well, it sounds good. It's not ringing. It sounds okay. Then I kind of bring it in the mix and maybe it doesn't stand out. But if you'll start to have something to compare that to early on in your mixing stage instead of when you almost get finished with the song, it will help you tremendously. So tip number 5 is to treat the kit as one instrument. Don't treat it as a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, a tom. Treat it as one instrument. Let me show you a little bit about how I do that in the mix to simplify things when you're getting started. Kick out, those are what we actually recorded here in the studio. Then I've got kick Nash and snare Nash, which was from 2 samples. I've got them colored a little bit different. Then we got a snare top, snare bottom. Then we've got the toms, got the hi-hats. We've got some other color in here, some shakers and some things like that we don't really worry about today. But what I do is, so we've got a kick in, kick out, and another kick sample. And we've got all 3 of those right here. I've got those run into a kick bus, which is right here. So when we solo that out, we'll hear just the kicks. Now, what people have done so many times before, and what I used to do, is I would start to EQ and compress each 3 of those kick drums. Then I would go to the snare and silence them out. But let's treat it all as in one kit. So if we just take just the whole entire kit, and we hear what we have here, and that's everything that I've got recorded with all the compression and so forth and so on. Let's just take everything off the mix. I'm going to take all the inserts and everything off I have there. So you'll notice I don't have anything in each individual kick, and which is what I used to do. I used to put compression and EQ on all of those kick drums, and it would just take so much time. I'm not saying that you may not have to go back and do that at some point in time in your mix if you really got something sounding off, but a lot of times you can just cover that in your drum bus. And where I'm going to start off with that is I'm going to start that off in the main drum bus right here, listening to the whole entire kit. And I'm going to try to treat that kit. And what I've got here, and I'm just going to bring this, I'm going to bring everything into this. This is not an in-depth tutorial on how to mix drums. This is just kind of a basic concept on how I approach it from the very beginning. But so I'll compress that. Then we've got some EQ here. I'm rolling off the whole kit. Looks like at about 100 hertz. Got a little dip here in the mids. Then I've got a compressor. I'm just compressing a little bit at a time, about, looks like maybe three or four. Some more EQ, and then a little more EQ once again. That's on my main drum bus. And then I heard some things here, obviously, in the kick I didn't like, so now I've gone back over here on the kick. And I've actually done a little bit more work on here. The compressor here, I'm using a LA76, it's the LA76 Chris Lord Algeo Waves plug-in, which I like a lot. Just barely moving the needle on the compression. I'm not doing a whole lot here. I'm not trying to overthink this and overmix it. Also here on the, got a little cut, it looks like about 48 hertz, and then a little bump here at about 80 for the kick drum, adding a little bottom end. So That's basically, kind of the way I'm talking about approaching it. Don't go about trying to mix every single drum on the kit. So the basic approach here, not getting into an adept mixing tutorial. If you want to see some of that, leave a comment down below and we'll maybe do that next time. But don't try to mix every single drum. You may have to go back and fix some of those. Don't get me wrong, but so many times, if you've got all the work up front right in the recording and the mic placement and so forth and so on, you can really cover that a lot in the buses. And I start with the main bus and I go to the kick, and then here I've got the snare. Going right here, you can see all I've got is one compressor and EQ on the snare. Then I've got some reverb down here, so I'm adding reverb to the whole kit, and I also EQ the reverb, and that kind of starts getting into more in-depth mixing tutorial, and we'll start talking about that, maybe that on another video. But one of the things that I do once I feel like that I've got the drum mix actually where I want it, then I bring that into the entire mix and I listen to it. This sounds crazy. And I'm listening for three different things. First of all, I'm listening for the vocal. That's the most important part of the mix, that it shines through. And then to me, the next important thing is your kick and your snare. And one of the ways that I try to judge on how loud they need to be, this is one of the hardest things for me to figure out, is I lower the volume on the master fader. And when it gets low as I can possibly get it, where I can barely hear the vocals, I want almost everything else to drop out, the vocals to be in front, and I want to hear just a little bit of kick and snare. I don't want to hear much of anything else. And that kind of tells me that I'm pretty close into how loud that I need the kick and the snare and the vocal. And I'll kind of show you a little bit about what I'm talking about. Maybe this will come through on the video. This sounds crazy. So I don't know if you can hear that or how well you can hear that, but you can hear the vocal good. I can hear the kick and the snare, and everything else is kind of behind that. So that's kind of what I'm looking for as I'm trying to finalize the mix and trying to find how loud the kick and the snare is in the entire mix. I want to lower that volume down. I want to hear that vocal and everything else kind of dropping out, and barely hear that kick and the snare. And that tells me I'm pretty close. Well, I hope that you found these 5 tips to be helpful and you see some value in this. There's certainly some things that when I was starting out that I wish I would have known. Some of these things I knew and I learned, but I didn't put them into practice because I didn't think it was any big deal. Can't tell you how many times I tried to fix things in the mix and how many hours or days I wasted trying to do that, spend the time up front. But if you found some value in this video, please consider subscribing, liking the video, ringing the bell for future notification. If you got anything particular that you'd like to see us review or talk about on the channel, certainly let us know in the comments. Hope that you have a great week. God bless you and keep looking out.